Test, test. Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing that. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Glad you're all here for Bible class time today. I was getting a grandchild settled in youth group. We have 2 of our 3 grandchildren here today because we're going to camp. There are others that have grandkids here or that are going to camp. So today's a big camp day, big day for us. But we will carry on our usual here this morning. So Brother Paul is going to come and lead us in a song, and then we will be studying from Luke chapter 12 today. Luke chapter 12, beginning at verse 22. Brother Paul? Okay. This is our lesson for today. All right. Hello, Christy. Hey, Ernest. Okay, all right. Hey, Christy, you want a book? We're doing lesson 3 today. Here's the lesson we're doing today. Born of His Spirit. There we go. So this morning in our book, we're on lesson 3. I gave out all the extra books I have. We can make more for next week. But if you have a Bible, you'll be doing fine by turning to Luke chapter 12 and verse 22. Luke chapter 12, verse 22 is where we are picking up today. And the booklet is called Devoted to the Teachings, because in this section of Luke, Jesus does a lot of teaching, and that is everything we're going to look at today is Jesus talking, Jesus teaching in one form or another. So we call this kingdom teachings in Luke chapter 12, beginning at verse 22. Last week, we ended the lesson with the parable that's normally called the rich fool, the person who had an extra good year with his crop was going to make him wealthy. So he thought about ways then that he could enjoy his wealth. He thought that with this bumper crop that he had brought in, he could, in his words, eat, drink, and be merry. And he was set for life. So his barns that he had wouldn't even hold all the crop that he had brought in. So he tore those down to build bigger ones and got all of his wealth in there. And then that night, he died. So there was the moral of the story that Jesus gave, that really we're supposed to catch on to the moral of the story ourselves. And the moral is that to be centered in the temporary is a foolish pursuit. You've heard me say before that my favorite scripture is 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 18, which says, keep your eye on the things that are unseen, that are invisible. That's one reason I like that, because it's paradoxical, it's humorous in that way. How can you keep your eye on something that you cannot see? But that's what that's what the instruction is. Keep your eye on the things that are unseen, and then it tells us why. Because the unseen things, those things we cannot see, God is invisible. Heaven is not visible to us yet. Our souls are not visible to us. But it's the things that are unseen that are eternal. Anything that you can see, as that verse closes out, anything that you can see is temporal, it's temporary. If you can see it, if you can touch it, then it's just a temporary thing. It's not going to be here forever. So one day all of those things will be gone. So the investment that we should make then, the investment in our life, is not in the material, the temporary things, but rather we should always be centered on the things which are invisible. Those are the eternal things. Well, in the parable that we had last week, the man brought in his crops. He could see those. He could store those. He could run his hands through the grain, and he could admire his barns, and he could count his money. But then that night he died, and the Lord's question was, now whose is all that? Because you can't take it with you. So that's the moral of the story that Jesus told last week. It was prompted by someone Jesus had been talking about, because we're in a section of Jesus doing some teachings. Jesus had already been doing some teachings on some pretty heavy subjects, including the Holy Spirit and the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. There was really, really heavy stuff people needed to pay attention to. And someone had asked the question, they just popped out a question and said, will you tell my brother to divide our inheritance with me fairly? And Jesus said, we're not here to talk about you and your brother and your squabbles over family money. We're here to talk about eternal things, things that matter, eternal things. So that was last week. Beginning in verse 22, which is where we are today, and we're going to go through verse 59, so we got a lot to cover. Verse 22, Jesus begins some teachings based on that parable of the rich fool and the point of the parable, which is that we should not invest in the temporary, but instead make our treasures in heaven, because those are the things that last, those are the things that matter, they are important. They're unseen, but they are eternal. So, remembering that Jesus had just finished that parable about a man who was anxious about this life, about his crops and about his barns and about whether he had enough to retire or not. So he was anxious about all of those things. And Jesus says, beginning in verse 22, following that parable, and he said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you shall eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his lifespan? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So following this parable of the rich fool and a man who is anxious about this life, Jesus said to his disciples, verse 22, this is actually something, I know there's a lot of details in here, but here's something we need to pay attention to in the Gospel of Luke as we go through things. We pointed it out last week. Chapter 12 and verse 1 says that there were thousands of people that were around. It was, Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, and by the way, that enters into some of the heaviness of the subject matter that Jesus teaches about. He knows that when he gets to Jerusalem, that he's going to suffer at the hands of the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, be killed, be raised again the third day, and then ascend after 40 days to the Father, and his work on earth will be done. So he is thinking heavy thoughts and talking about heavy subjects to those who will listen. But it is feast time, Passover time, so there are a lot of people around. So chapter 12 and verse 1 mentions thousands of people, and yet, and we pointed this out last week, still in verse 1 at the end it says, he began to say to his disciples first. And then down in verse 4, I tell you, my friends. So there were thousands, there were a lot of people who were hanging around that could have heard what Jesus had to say, but while there were lots of people who could listen in, Jesus was talking to his disciples and to his friends in these teachings that he offered. Then in verse 22, where we're starting today, again, he said to his disciples. So he is talking to the people who are following him, who are lending their ear to him, giving them good instruction. In verse 32, he says, fear not, little flock. So this is the people over whom Jesus is shepherd, again, his disciples, his followers. Down in verse 41 of chapter 12 of Luke, notice what Peter says. Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for all? So Peter begins to, when Jesus is talking about some things, Peter says, now, are you talking to everybody, to the thousands? Are you talking to every disciple? Peter was one of the apostles. Are you talking to the apostles? So we have to pay a little attention to who Jesus is talking to. Peter's trying to get that straight. Before we leave this chapter, down in verse 54, he also said to the crowds. So there are thousands. Jesus speaks some of the things he speaks to his disciples, his friends, the flock. But some of it he speaks to the crowds. So we don't want to just skip over who Jesus is talking to when we're reading the Gospel of Luke. And when he spoke to his disciples, he had an affirmation for them of the lesson that had been communicated in the parable of the rich fool. He said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? Food nourishes our body. I like to eat every day, a couple of times every day, don't you? Food nourishes our body. Clothing keeps us warm and protects us from the elements. Shelter is important, and we talk about those things as the basics of food, clothing, and shelter. You know, those are the basics of life. That's what you need. Jesus acknowledges that these are some necessities, but they are the kind of thing. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and notice this. In verse 30, Jesus said, "For all the nations of the world seek after these things." So again, that gets back to who Jesus is talking to. There are the Jewish people who know God, who have been dependent upon God for generations, going back to the time of the wilderness wandering, when God fed them by putting manna on the ground every morning, and by when they were in places where there was no water, bringing water from a rock. There's that little verse in our older testaments that tells us over those 40 years, their shoes did not wear out, their clothing did not wear out, which is, so, you know, God was taking care of them in that way. So he is talking to, now here comes Jesus, he is talking to Jewish people, but in particular to his disciples who they have seen Jesus. Let's feed 5,000 people with what? Well, how about 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? So they've seen Jesus take care of food and shelter and clothing without any sort of trouble. So Jesus brings that subject up, and he does say, and this is important language, when he says, "For all the nations of the world seek after these things." You know, the way the Jewish people saw things, they were the Jews, God's people, and then there were the nations, everybody else. And because God had had his covenant since Sinai with the Jewish people, all of those people, the nations, the Gentiles and nations, same thing. The Gentiles, the nations, they were all pagans and heathens and idol worshipers. They didn't know God, but they seek after food, shelter, and clothing. And so Jesus says, so here you are, you're God's people, you're God's little flock. Jehovah is your shepherd. I am the good shepherd. And so don't worry about food, shelter, and clothing. Yeah, I recognize everybody has to have that. God recognizes the necessity of that. But don't be anxious and worry about those things. That's not top priority. There's something else that is a top priority, and that is, as he says in verse 31, seeking the kingdom, the unseen, the invisible, the eternal. So Jesus is talking about those things, and he makes some good illustrations through there. He says, consider the ravens. The ravens were a scavenging bird, and so when Jesus says that they neither, this is verse 24, the ravens neither sow nor reap, they don't have storehouses, they don't have barns, and yet somehow they survive, and they're just scavenging, finding whatever food is immediately available. You know, there are times, the Bible does have a balance of teaching. So here's something that popped into my mind, and it might be coming up in your brain as well. Proverbs chapter 6. I'm going to go back to Proverbs chapter 6 and how to live wisely. Proverbs chapter 6 says this beginning at verse 6. So in Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 6. This is a little bit different nuance of God's care for us than the scavenging ravens who still manage to find food. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber and want like an armed man. So there is a place, and the book of Proverbs acknowledges, there is a place to make some preparation for the necessities of this life. But Jesus is here to make a point to say But we don't have to be anxious about those things, worry about those things, and certainly don't make them top priority. Jesus had said, do not worry about what you shall eat or your body or what you shall put on. Life is more than food and clothing. It was the rich fool who had said, now I have everything that I need, so I will, as he put it again, eat, drink, and be merry. That's back in verse 19. I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods, laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. So Jesus is addressing those very things that the man, he thought, now I'm set. I've got enough, I'm set. I can eat, drink, and be merry. Well, he wasn't set because his life ended that night. So it's not that those things are to be completely ignored. There is some preparation. It's good to be a productive and thrifty person, but that's not to be top priority. Even the ravens, they make no plans, and God feeds them. And then there's this verse 25. Every verse ties back to that parable. Verse 25, and which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his lifespan? That was the rich fool's problem. He thought he was set, and then he died a death at an unexpected time. That's something we're not in control of. It's appointed unto each of us to die, and after that the judgment. But we don't know when we're going to die or how we're going to die, and we can't lengthen. We can't lengthen our time. We can't add by worrying and being anxious about that appointment. We can't add to it. But what we can do is prepare for the judgment that comes after. We can't add an hour to our lifespan, but we can plan for the judgment that comes after. So these are the points that Jesus is making based on that the man in this parable. And then he says this in verse 27, consider the lilies, how they grow. They don't toil, they don't spin. So it's the same message as the ravens. They don't work to make preparation, and yet God takes care of them. We do work, and we're more valuable than they. So how much more is God going to take care of us? We just need to make sure that our work, the investment of our energy, is in things of good priority rather than things of low priority, which we cannot take with us. And so then let us seek after the kingdom and let those things be added to us. And then there's this in verse 32, just another little element in the same lesson. Fear not, little flock. So get this next line. For it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So we're to seek the kingdom. We're to be about kingdom things. We're to treasure and value the kingdom. The kingdom is to be a priority for us. The kingdom with its King Jesus, with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. These are the things that are to capture our minds and hearts and love and dedication, devotion, as we're talking about this year. But even with that, so God, don't be anxious about food, shelter, and clothing. The Father knows that you need them, and He will supply those things. He's a provider. He'll provide those things. But that's not all that God is there to provide. God has more important provisions than food, shelter, and clothing for us. He wants to give. Notice the language. The Father wants to give you the kingdom. It comes by grace. It's a gift of God. And He gives us the kingdom, and it's His good pleasure to give us the kingdom. Here's a little foreshadowing, maybe, in the book of Luke. When we get to Luke chapter 15, we're in chapter 12 right now. When we get to Luke chapter 15, we're going to have the story of the prodigal son. But remember, there's another son. He's the elder son. And he was the dutiful and present, but unhappy and anxious and non-brother loving son. And he wondered to his father, he said, well, where's my fatted calf? Where's my party? Where's my robe? Where's my gift? And the father said, look around. My kingdom, my farm, it's all yours. You have it all. So I think we have a little foreshadowing here of that. We are to look around and to see that it's God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom and how blessed we are. And so let's do kingdom living with the King and with the Father who is the provider of all of these things. So, unlike the rich fool who stored up wealth that he did not live to spend, Jesus' disciples should make deposits in heaven as a way of seeking the kingdom. And just as God provides for food and clothing, it's also his good pleasure to give to us the kingdom. God has priorities straight, and so should we. And whether we are seeking the material or the eternal, the temporary or the eternal, the material or the heavenly, then the nature of our treasure, whichever one of those we treasure, the nature of our treasure is what tells us is the nature of our heart. Is our heart a heart that is bent toward God and his kingdom and his Son and the things of the Spirit, the things of the eternal? Is this our treasure? And so what we are spending our energies living for? Or is it the material over here, which could be enjoyed for a season, but it's gone quickly and will be gone quickly, and we can't take it with us. So the nature of the thing that we treasure is also a clue to the nature of our heart. So because of that, because it's the eternal that's important, the invisible that's important, the kingdom that's important, rather than the material, let God take care of those things and set our priorities towards the things that are most important. That's going to lead then to a readiness for the judgment, because that, just like that rich fool died, our time is coming. So we need to be ready for that. And that's what the next section is about. So hear it that way. Jesus is continuing the teaching. Get your priorities in order. Treasure heavenly things, because there is an end coming, and we need to be ready for it. So beginning in verse 35, we'll read through verse 48. Stay dressed for action, and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Peter said, Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for all? And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and wise manager whom his master will set over his household to give them their portion of food at the proper time? God's still the giver. Blessed is that servant whom the master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not expecting, and at an hour that he does not know, and will cut him in pieces, and will put him with the unfaithful. And that servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know, and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, Of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand more. So Jesus then gives several metaphors here that tell us to be centering on a preparation for the coming judgment, for the coming of the Son of Man, for when God brings an end to things. And here's what we're told, several of these metaphors. One is to stay dressed for action. So in other words, we need to sleep with our boots on, spiritually speaking. We wear the shoes, the boots that are shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Well, let's keep those things on. Let's sleep in those. And keep your lamps aflame. You know, Jesus is going to tell another story about the women who are waiting for a marriage feast to begin. This story is about a marriage feast. And who did not prepare by bringing enough oil for their candles to last the time that it was going to take for the wedding party to come. And so they were left out because they had no flame. So keep your lamps aflame. And that's another way of saying keep the lights on. Jesus is coming, let's keep the lights on for him. So, and because he is arriving. We're expecting a arrival. Patty and I we're one of the few in our neighborhood. Most of our neighbors turn on outside lights at night. I guess they're really concerned about safety. And I guess my thought is, if they turn on their lights, I don't have to turn mine on and use my electricity. So we have outside lights, but we don't turn them on unless company's coming. And sometimes, family members might be traveling and arriving late, and we want them, when they come down the street, to be able to see our house, identify our house, be able to get their stuff and come in a lighted fashion into our house. So when we know company's coming, we may not know the hour they're coming. We might go ahead and go to sleep ourselves, but we're going to leave the lights on. And that's the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about in a spiritual way. Leave the lights on. The Lord is coming. It shows a readiness, a preparation, that your mindset is ready to receive. And then also stay awake. Jesus does say some things here that might be, maybe this is why Peter asked the question, are you talking to everybody or to us? Because these are some things that are, I'm not quite sure what Jesus is getting at in every one of these. But he does say that should the master come in the second watch of the night, that would be 9 to midnight, or in the third watch of the night, that would be midnight to 3. I got to tell you that third watch of the night is one that I don't ever see. So that's in the going into youth event sleepovers and that kind of thing. 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, man, that's about all I'm good for. So, but if you are expecting someone to come and you want to be ready and you're ready to receive, then at that unexpected hour, if it comes at 9 to midnight, midnight to 3, blessed is the one who's still awake and is ready. And that seems to be a special blessing for a special kind of preparedness and being anxious for the master to come. And certainly, don't be the one who is unready, and so the burglar is able to break in because of a lack of preparation. It's important because the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you don't expect. So Peter says, so is this for us that you're talking? Are you talking? Yeah, and I can imagine Peter thinking about the 12, or about all the disciples, or about the thousands of the crowds. Jesus will speak to the crowds later, and says, who are you talking to about being ready and being awake and having a special blessing? And although I don't get everything that Jesus says next, I think there is one thing that's easy to get. Jesus asked the question, who am I talking to? Who then is the faithful and wise manager that his master will set over his household? And I can see the apostles, being that the apostles are given a special place, sitting upon Revelation. In Matthew 24, it talks about the 12 sitting on the 12 thrones and those sorts of things. But also Jesus is being a bit more general than that. And this is what he says. Verse 43, blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Who is Jesus talking to? Is it to everybody? Is it to us? Is it to a certain select group? Jesus is talking to anyone who is willing to be a servant. Oh, that servant. Who's Jesus talking to? He's talking to that servant who is going to be ready and is going to be prepared. And among the children of God, either by creation or in Jesus, among the humanity and those made in God's image and God's special people, Jesus did speak here of some who were ready. It's a servant who was ready, and therefore was given put in a higher place, as Jesus called it. He'll give them their portion of food, but he'll also set him over all his possessions. And then there are some, who have, in the delay, have forgotten completely about the master, and they're like taking charge themselves like it's their own and abusing and misusing. Then those will receive the wrath of the master when he comes. And then there's that, verse 47, and that servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. There are just a couple of places in Scripture that do give a little hint, and that's all that I think we can say about it. It gives a little hint about different levels of blessedness and different levels of punishment. But however that works, and I don't think there's much we can say about it, however that works, here is the paradigm statement, which is at the end of this section. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted, much will they demand the more. So if we are a people of God, in his kingdom, loving kingdom things, seeking after kingdom things, taking care of the kingdom, making ourselves prepared and helping others be prepared for the judgment that is to come, because it is God's good pleasure to give us the gift of the kingdom with these responsibilities. We have kingdom responsibilities. And with kingdom responsibilities comes kingdom reward as we fulfill those responsibilities. There also comes punishment when we fail those responsibilities. And so let's love the kingdom, find our niche, find our place of servitude. And so are you speaking to us or to all? Well, I'm talking to everybody who's willing to be that servant, who will take responsibility and prepare things for the receiving of the master when he comes. And if we'll do that, all will be well. And then there's this till the end of the chapter, beginning at verse 49 and going through 59. Jesus, and now I told you he was getting on some heavy subjects, and we've talked about, I've already said more than I know on some of these things. So here comes some more heavy subject from Jesus, beginning at verse 49. I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on, in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He also said to the crowds, so we know he's now going to speak to everyone. If Peter had asked, who are you talking to? Well, right now he's speaking to the crowds. When you see a cloud rising in the west, you say at once, a shower is coming, and so it happens. And when you see a south wind blowing, you say, there's going to be scorching heat, and it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? And why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? As you go with your accuser before the magistrate, make an effort to settle with him on the way, lest he drag you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer put you in prison. I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the very last penny. So here is a strong statement from Jesus that has to do with the severity of judgment. And because this is a reality, this is a real thing, we do need information. We need warning. It's helpful to us to know. And Jesus speaks of himself coming to cast fire on the earth. Way back when we started our Luke study, and John the Baptist said, I baptize you with water, but Jesus, but the one who comes after me, will baptize with Holy Spirit and with fire. We talked about that and how the fire both destroys and refines. It does both of those, depending on the substance of the thing that is burned in the fire. So some things are consumed and burned up. Other things are purified and made stronger. So which will we be? What are we made of? Are we made of kingdom things, seeking kingdom things? And Jesus himself, there will be suffering. Jesus says, I've got a baptism to be baptized with. And we know what he's talking about. He's talking about the cross and death. And my God, why have you forsaken me? And he's ready for, it's close. He's ready for it to be done and over so that he can go on to the next thing. And yet Jesus recognizes this reality. We're all going to have to deal with this. So either we'll be a believer and a disciple of Jesus, we'll be with him, or we'll be, as he said in the earlier place, against him and we'll scatter. And sometimes we might be in the same household. That's what Jesus talks about. There will be division because we have to choose a side. And sometimes others that we care about, that we're related to, sometimes they don't choose the Jesus side. But if we want to be ready for this judgment, then we choose the Jesus side and we serve in that way and recognize that not everyone may go with us. But here's what we need to be watching for. I know we all like to watch the weather on the news, but we're all kind of weather people ourselves. You know, we look ourselves. We know what the clouds mean and what the winds mean, and all of those, the heat dome. You know, we get familiar with all of that. Jesus says, so you become expert in predicting the weather by the signs. Well, you need to predict this present time and what's going on. And by the present time, Jesus is no doubt speaking of his own experience of the cross, which he is about to endure. And he's been trying to tell them, he's been telling them all along the way, I must go to Jerusalem, suffer at the hands of the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and rise again the third day. And so he's been pretty direct in telling them. So, but even so, they were unprepared when all of that happened. They were surprised. So Jesus says you need to predict that, and we need to be watchful for the end times. And we don't have many clues about that except just to be ready. But we can see how evil the world is and how it's ripe for judgment. So interpret the signs for the present time. And then here's what we do with that. Judge for yourself what is right and do what is right. This thing about the accuser at the end, when judgment day comes, it's too late to make arrangements then. So settle accounts now. Be ready now for the coming of the Master. Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning.